So we are definitely going to be having a conversation about the crisis that the Catholic Church is going through today at this very moment. I'm inviting you to join us. Not just a question of paying attention, but join us to be part of this conversation. It's a very important conversation for a lot of stuff that's going on out there. It really comes in from every perspective, from the political arena, for what we're dealing right now in terms of social justice and poverty, and everything connected to the strong differences among religions. So I'm inviting you to be part of this conversation today. We're going to be talking about the papal primacy that was in place for so many years, and how is no longer that clear. The type of ecumenism that it used to be practiced before, the old traditional mass that so many people still go to. By the way, one of the fastest growing. I'm looking forward to having you as part of that conversation. So I was having lunch the other day with a very good friend of mine, and we were having a conversation about a very specific religion. And he asked me the question, well, do you think that this religion should be treated or considered as a legitimate religion? And I'm going to save that conversation for another day, because it's definitely a little controversial. My conclusion was that it's not. For me, that religion should be treated as a political force, as an economic structure, a way of governing, many other things that I can call it, but not necessarily a religion for a number of reasons. Second of all, he then asked me the question. He said, I know that you've been a Catholic, probably not one of the good ones, and he was 100% right on that. But he asked me the question, well, why do you have so much certainty that is a religion that should be considered a religion? So let me give you how did I came to that conclusion. I want to arrive to that point. I'm a guy that loves history a lot, and I put a lot of time into reading. As a matter of fact, my path to understanding, why was I part of a specific religion. My name is Marvin Del Valle. I'm a Catholic. And we were discussing a little bit of the crisis that the Catholic Church is going through. But I was also describing to him my way to get to that conclusion, that level of conviction that you need to have in order to be part of something, right? So let me start by, if you embrace the Judeo-Christian tradition, if you actually do that, right, and you go deep into history, it's very difficult for me, from my perspective. But by the way, I'm respectful of how you see that transition and that process. I'm going to oversimplify it, because I also want to get to the actual crisis that's taking place with the church, right? The first thing that I will tell you is that if we navigate the Old Testament, right? If you navigate everything that is connected to the Old Testament, you can call that a time of prophecy, right? There's an announcement there. A Messiah is going to come, and is going to again to be the Redeemer, and there's going to be so many special things connected to this idea that a Messiah was coming, right? For us Christians, that Messiah was Christ, right? So Jesus Christ comes in, literally presents all the signs and symbols, at least to the group of people that accepted that. And so now you go from a time of prophecy to a Messianic time, right? And it's super important to understand that difference for a number of reasons, right? One of them is the fact that, all the symbols and everything that some people actually expected was overwhelmingly enough, including, his passing, the dying, the crucifixion, resurrection, act of, the redeeming act of his death for the benefit of every single one of us, right? But in between all of that, something very unique, very special takes place, which is an interaction that happens between Christ and Peter, right? The conversation is very simple. Who do they say that I am? And they responded, everybody was responding, well, they said that you're probably Elijah, you're probably the prophet of this, the prophet of that. And then he asked them directly, who do you think that I am? And Peter responded, you are the Son of the living God. And so it went into a description that Christ himself said, this is not something that came from you or from any other man. This can only This can only be something that was revealed to you. So I say to you, Peter, son of Jonas, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. I will build my church upon you, right? And you are racked. And it goes into a statement that everybody is familiar with. It's a big argument behind the statement, because obviously some of the other apostolic churches that don't subscribe to the primacy of Peter or the primacy of the Pope, they said, well, he said that to all the apostles. And I agree with that. There's certain things that were said to all the apostles, except for who he was given the keys to the kingdom. He literally, that would be the equivalent to me asking all my friends, hey, come to my house, here is the address. So by way of GPS, somewhere, somehow, you're going to get there. For some of the old timers, like my good friend Lorena, you're probably going to be map questing your way there, but you'll get there somewhere, somehow. But if I tell somebody, hey, here's the key to my house, right? Unless somebody's going to break into my house, if a bunch of people showed up there, the only person that's going to have access to open my house is going to be that person who I gave the key to. And that's essentially the difference between the rest of the apostles and the primacy of Peter. To one of them, the keys were given, right? The keys to heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you release, and so on and so forth, right? So, but the keys were only given to one of them. So now we go from prophecy, we go also into the Messianic time, and then we go into a transition, but something is about to take place, and above everybody else, one of them is trusted, right? Which is Peter. By the way, not the most perfect, not the most loyal. This is a guy that was emotional. This is a guy that is denying Christ 3 times. A lot of issues with Peter. You know what I mean? It appears that at the end, Christ trusted and believed in Peter, maybe a lot more than Peter believed in himself. However you want to process that. But I think it was an incredible choice that later on was going to remind us of the significance of the choice itself, right? What I mean by that is that for Catholics today, the Pope is Peter. It's not just a descendant of, for us, that formulation that the Pope is Peter, right? That has the primacy. If you look behind me, as a matter of fact, that is the coat of arms of the Vatican. And one of the most important key components to that coat of arms is the keys, right? And if you look at the Vatican, if you look at most of the papal coat of arms, you're going to see a set of keys which symbolizes the authority that was given to Peter. So why is the Pope so significant and so special for the Catholic Church? Because again, through him, the continuity, right? The continuity that goes from Peter all the way to our current Pope Francis, talks about that church that was built and founded by Christ himself. So again, if you subscribe into a Judeo-Christian tradition, unless you want to ignore significant facts of history or significant information out of the Bible, right? Especially when we're talking about arguments that come from the Bible, it's very difficult to understand how somebody will get lost from that factor. So I said to him, my conclusion, I said, I couldn't be anything else. If I'm going to subscribe to the Judeo-Christian tradition, I have to remain a Catholic for that reason. Now, let me move away from that, because the purpose of this conversation is just to talk a little bit about the actual crisis that the Catholic Church is going through at this very moment. By the way, the Church throughout history, had a significant amount of different types of crises, that they have to overcome for different reasons. I want to just talk about the one that happens, during or post-Vatican II, right? If you go through history, I'm one of those guys that I intentionally looked into some of the most difficult conversations and some of the most difficult moments of the Catholic history to be able to say, can I still be a Catholic? What's the story with the Crusades? I will even agree to the fact that probably one of the most difficult times to process for me was the time of the Inquisition, right? Everything that took place there. If I would have been alive then, is probably the only time that I will consider not to be a Catholic, right? I think that was truly, truly dark ages for the Catholic Church. Everything else, if you put it through the lens of history, I can still see it as something that I can subscribe to. But let's bring it all the way up to Vatican II. The last three traditional popes that we consider part of the old guard, which is Pope Pius X, Pius XI, and Pius XII. I want to say something about actually Pius X, who was considered a real Catholic Orthodox pope. There was a formulation that was used then, which is that Christ is the only way, the only door, the only way to heaven, right? The only way to the Father, the only way to God. And what the formulation ended as part of the formulation that this Pope put forward was, and the only way to Christ is through the Catholic Church. So there was no negotiation then about, is it okay to be part of this religion? Is it okay to be part of, what about the ecumenism and all these conversations that today appear to be normal? At that point, it was very simple. If you are outside of the Catholic Church, the responsibility was to bring you in, even if you were a Christian, meaning Protestant, or even any of the Orthodox apostolic churches that do not fall in alignment with the primacy of the Pope. So the idea was to bring you back. The idea was to bring you into the fold. The idea was that because that is the only way you can get to Christ, and Christ is the only way. So very, very narrow formulation, not a lot of room for negotiating, right? This is what it is, and this is the only way that it's going to work. Go through finally the passing of Pius XII brings in John 23rd. They call it El Papa Bueno, just because he was considered a very good pope, meaning a nice person, right? His background was not so much a theological or philosophical, just a good person. El Papa Bono, they call it in Italian, or El Papa Bueno in Espanol, the good pope, right? And so he calls for a conclave, which is known as Vatican II. That means that all the bishops, cardinals, patriarchs, and anybody who is in connection to the Catholic Church. And this time around, they go a step further, which is they invite some other people, only to be observers, from some of the other churches, including Protestants, including Jews, including Muslims, just to observe what's actually taking place. They're not necessarily supposed to participate. They quickly realized that conclave is that meeting is moving into areas that will remove some very traditional basic concepts. And then that triggers almost immediately the first wave of a crisis, that we can describe it as a crisis officially. The fact of the matter is there's a couple of things that were literally being changed as part of that conversation. Number one was they were absolutely rejecting papal supremacy by introducing collegiality, meaning all the bishops happen to be at the same level. All the bishops descend from very much of a Orthodox position, which is all the bishops do descend. There is continuity. They do descend from the apostles. And the Bishop of Rome, which is the Pope, is the Bishop of Rome, is just another bishop, maybe even first among equals, but at that point, that position is rejected. We're talking about, by the time we get to Vatican II, papal primacy is well established, right, and is literally built into every single layer of communication. And in many cases, a lot of churches will argue, well, that's the reason why we never reunited or we never got back together, because we accepted the idea maybe being first among equals, but not necessarily primacy, right? So but at that moment, collegiality was opening the door to say, maybe we are the same. Maybe we can talk. So that was an incredible innovation that threw the whole Vatican II conclave into all kinds of issues and troubles. The second thing is the acceptance of religion tolerance, right? Is the whole idea that some people were looking to introduce religious liberty, right? Which many other religions, by the way, they will claim that they actually profess religious liberty, meaning you and your conscience should be free to follow whatever you think is your heart tells you, however wrong your heart may be, or your consciousness may be, or your information may be, but that you should be entitled. And what the church argued up until that point is that our responsibility is to give you light, to show you the way. And the only way, again, the formulation, right? The only way to Christ is through the Catholic Church, and Christ is the way to God and to heaven. So any form of ecumenism outside of the churches that will subscribe to the supremacy or the primacy of the Pope was the type of ecumenism that was never accepted. This is something that was introduced at that level, at that moment, and again, changes the relationships among some of the churches. You know, some of them came closer, some actually started. So internal separation takes place almost immediately coming out of this event. And the last one, obviously, probably the most visual, just because today, through social media and communication, people get the chance to see the difference between the new Mass and the old Mass. So number 3 is the changes to the liturgy, right? How the Mass is practiced, how it's actually performed. The fact that the Catholic Church is known as the Latin Rite came from the simple fact that the way Mass was actually celebrated, it was actually practiced, was by doing it in Latin, right? Which is something that, again, part of the changes here, we're going to use the vernacular language of every place, every country, so that people will have the ability to understand it a little better. Many popes argue that language was a way of maintaining unity and unifying people from different places. So they had a common way to praise, a common way but more than anything else, the style is not just a question about which one is prettier or which one looks better. Fundamentally, a lot of things are changed on how the actual Mass are celebrated. Today we celebrate something that is called Novus Ordos, which in essence is just talking about a new tradition, which now since 1962, 63, makes it, a 60-year-old practice, right? Is that correct? Yeah, about 60 years old, 70 years old in practice. And so what that means is that for a lot of people that don't know anything about the old Mass and the old tradition, this is all you know. This is the old tradition. And if that was a fundamental mistake, and if it was, and I'm only saying if it was a fundamental mistake, if it was a fundamental error, you have a lot of people right now practicing in ways that they probably not necessarily supposed to be practicing. They talk about the lack of reverence, right? The lack of reverence that is connected to the new Mass, and some of the abuses connected to the Eucharist, and that there's a number of things that really became an issue. As a matter of fact, it became so much of an issue that a group came out of it today, one of the fastest growing branches of the Catholic Church. They are 100% Catholic. They do accept the primacy of the Pope, and is known as the SSPX, which is the Society of St. Pius X. Again, they wanted to honor one of the most traditional popes that was part of the Catholic Church, and they wanted to stick to those principles. They do not believe that we should be embracing the risk of embracing the type of ecumenism that is running the risk of placing right and wrong at the same level. It's a very delicate issue, you know what I mean? Because if we are all the same, then what difference does it make? If you follow, a Jewish tradition or Muslim tradition, what difference does it make? If I'm a Protestant or if I'm a Catholic, what difference does it make if I'm an Anglican or if I'm a Greek Orthodox? If we are all the same, right? This is not one of those cases that everybody can be right. We potentially run the risk of everybody being wrong, knowing that when you're talking about something that is divine, you know what I mean? This not one person. We're doing the best that we can to try to understand, again, that tradition, that message, to try to say, okay, everybody cannot be right. There is a possibility that all can be wrong, or there is a possibility that one is right according to that tradition, that we believe happens to be the right tradition. Listen, the purpose of this comment, I'm not trying to convert you into anything. I just want to describe to you how much of a crisis this really became coming out of Vatican II. And today, SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X, is a very specific order. They're growing. Their founder, Monsignor Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, is, I will say, will be judged by history very, very kindly. Managed to keep a lot of the traditions alive. I think that those traditions at some point will be embraced as something eternal. I have a phrase that I love to use, which is only the eternal is eternal. It sounds very simple, but hopefully you can dive into that a little more. But this man managed to do a lot of work, founded an order, and his statements when he was founded, when they were emerging and they were coming out and they want to hold on to some of those traditions and some of those principles. Again, papal primacy, ecumenism that is inviting everybody to find one single way to get back to Christ. And also the practice of the liturgy, the practice of the Mass. This man has managed through an incredible group of dedicated people, men and women, that are doing a phenomenal job expanding the size of their organization. One of the fastest growing, like I said, branches within the church today. And one of the statements that he made is, if what we are doing is something that comes from God, you will see fruits and it's going to get bigger and people will embrace it for what it is. If it doesn't come from God, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to go anywhere. Well, it keeps growing. I think those were definitely wise words that were actually said by this man. But the last thing that I want to tell you is that even more to the right of that position, because I'm talking about tradition, there is another group of people that argue for what they called a sede vacante type of scenario. But what that means is that there is no pope in the Vatican, that the seat of Peter is not being occupied by Peter or by a pope, that what we have is an anti-pope. And what they argue is that just about every pope post-Vatican II, including John XXIII, including Paul VI, John Paul I, who only reigned for 33 days, and then John Paul II being one of the second longest reigning pope in the Catholic Church, was there for a long time, who I appreciate very much because I grew up under that papacy, right? So it's very difficult for me sometimes to criticize certain things because these are things that I love dearly. I am certainly not one of the best Catholics in the Catholic Church. Let me make that very clear, but this is it's an institution that I love because I know it has done a lot of good for so many people. Benedict XVI took steps to make sure that this group, SXPX, was treated just a little better within the structure of the Catholic Church. There was at some point some excommunications that had taken place. He lifted all of that, essentially gave the green light for the Mass to be practiced. That Mass has now been restricted by Pope Francis, who is arguing that his responsibility is to protect a new tradition, which is the Novus Ordo tradition. The way he sees it is that if the church came together to produce a new way of doing certain things, it's his responsibility to protect it. History and people will judge many of these positions. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of information. Now, finally, I want to close it with the fact that, as you know, Pope Benedict XVI just recently passed away. But what makes this man unique, besides incredible writings and the fact that he took extreme measures to validate some of these traditional practices and gave them the opportunity to be out there without any kind of harassment. One of the things that everybody knows about him is that he ended up stepping down. Something that hasn't happened in many years ago. A real voluntarily, I'm stepping down and I'm going to resign my position. Most of this position, this is one of those positions that is considered a lifetime position, a real lifetime position where you absolutely are supposed to, you're expected to die performing the position. And that has been the case for, the overwhelming amount of popes. Either they died through persecution, or they died through old age, or some kind of sickness, but they die being a pope. Today, because of what happened with Benedict XVI, and now that he passed away, his successors, Pope Francis, who has been as a pope probably a little longer than what he himself actually expected, is saying, maybe I need to consider, maybe I myself, I am not physically in the position to continue to exercise my responsibility as the head of the Catholic Church. There's a lot of mixed emotions with that conversation, right? This is gaining momentum. It's something that was mentioned directly by him again, right? It's not the first time that this conversation is coming to the table. A lot of people are actually looking forward for Pope Francis to, I don't want to say to die, because that sounds very, very heartless, you know what I mean? But in this case, for the possibility of him stepping down. There's a lot of people that do not agree with his positions. There's a lot of people that don't believe that there is enough clarity about many of his writings and conversations, and in many ways, a lot of acts that appear to be acts of mercy ended up introducing a lot of confusion among Catholics, right? So instead of bridging the gap, maybe that gap just got a little bigger between the old traditionalists and a new church that has evolved after Vatican II. There's another group of people who actually love him because of his kindness. They see him as a good man. They see him as somebody that, may not be the deepest philosopher out there, or may not be, vested with the greatest knowledge of theology, and even not necessarily somebody that appreciates the richness of the tradition or the same church that he presides today. But they do see him as a good man, a lot of good intention, a lot of good faith. They would like to see some level of continuity. A lot of people think that the church always have to be as humble as possible, and it's very difficult for an institution like the Catholic Church, right? A lot of people are always confused about how much wealth do they have, how big is it? When you look at from buildings to works of art, it's very difficult to come up with a very specific number, but we probably could be passing, from billions to maybe going into $1 trillion, So very, very difficult to understand, okay, so how come that church be a humble church? That would probably require a whole different video, but at this moment, the only thing that I can tell you is that one of the crises that has emerged out of the conversation from our current Pope is that, and by the way, this really goes back to Paul VI, right? Is that it appears that we are shifting our position from being for the poor, which has always been a gospel request, a Christ very specific request, right? A very specific, clear position. We are transitioning from that to being for poverty. And I don't think that was ever a good idea. I think that there's nothing about the process. I'm listening to a lot of people talking about, surrender everything, give everything. And by the way, it is part of the language of the gospel. But I think that some people have been blessed with incredible qualities, talents. I think that a lot of people have been blessed with the ability to carry a heavier load, heavier weight, to be more productive than other people. And I think that those people actually have the ability to help the poor. And it's not that they need to be forced to do it. It's that hopefully we can entice them. Hopefully we can make them feel that it would be a good idea if you make the choice to actually help people that actually need to be helped. And I think that that is a responsibility that the church has today, right? To actually bridge the gap, but not by forcing, not by finger pointing, but by inviting somebody to say, if you truly, truly want to be a good Christian, you look at the many blessings you have. And it would be a phenomenal idea if because of you, something good can actually happen. The fact of the matter is that we don't know what the next papacy is going to look like, but there's a lot of people already hoping and praying, depending on which camp you belong. If you belong to a more traditionalists, if you're part of SSPX, if you're part of Sedevacantists, if you're part of many of these other entities that are rooting for some of the principles that were prior to Vatican II and are looking forward to call for a new conclave, and they want to make sure that a lot of these things go back to what was, Catholic principles for, 1700 years, right? And so, and that is the claim, that the old tradition favor us. We've been the church for centuries, over a millennial, and over a millennia. So for the new generation that is absolutely following a lot more the new tradition, they embrace it, they absolutely love it, They're having a very good experience at a personal level, and they practice it as a community. I'm inviting you, right, to just, don't dismiss the old traditions as something that is just old and antiquated. It's a 2,000-year-old tradition that has gone through so many changes, right? Some high highs, some very low lows. But it's also what ended up producing many of the phenomenal writings that we have coming out of the Catholic Church, many of the phenomenal principles that ended up coming out of the Catholic Church. Name any area, whether it is philosophy, even science, right? Even science. Philosophy, science, theology, anything, social work. Name any area that you want to name throughout history. Probably one of my favorites, even if you name art, I think that the word of art has benefited tremendously by the sponsorship of the Catholic Church. So any area, just name it, and you will see the hand of an institution that has always done a lot of good things. Is it a perfect institution? Well, maybe it's time to establish a difference and bring you back to the idea that the reason why Peter was chosen is as a reminder that as long as people are involved, we are going to be emotional. We are going to make mistakes. We're probably going to cut somebody's ear. We're probably going to deny Christ. Maybe not just through words, but through actions, right? And that is one of the biggest symbolisms connected to the selection of Peter, because obviously there was other apostles that probably would have fit that role better in terms of his faithfulness and his ability to just be a more pious, faithful apostle. But here we are today. I'm inviting you to share with us whatever it is that you know about this journey. Obviously, when you're talking about an entity that is 2,000 years old, that is going through so many adjustments right now, it's not a simple conversation. I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible so that we can, it's going to be a sequence of conversations that we're going to have about this topic. I would love to hear your feedback, regardless of what your belief system happens to be, or whatever background. If you happen to be also specifically, if you happen to be a Catholic embracing any of these positions, whether it is the old tradition or the new practice that we practice today under this new set of guidance and principles, I'm inviting you to share your perspective. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. Definitely happy to know that this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I definitely would like to add my perspective about it, but I'm inviting you. We have a lot of phenomenal people, a lot of smart people, a lot of people that have the background, education, and credentials to be able to advance this conversation even at a higher level. But nonetheless, it is a conversation that we need to have at this moment, and especially moving forward. So I appreciate you being part of this conversation. Looking forward to seeing you part of the next one, right? Thank you for joining us.